The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please read the letter from the speaker?
A letter 2025 to Mr. Scott Starr, Michigan. Dear Mr. Clerk, I appoint the following members of the 103rd Legislature to the following standing committees. Transportation and Infrastructure. Representatives Outman, Chair. Alexander, Majority Vice Chair. Cara, Bruck, Coons, Nyer, Preston, Bonak, Frisbee, Wertz, Herzberg, Minority Vice Chair. Hope, Colazar, Andrews, Grant, Miller, and Jimmy Wilson Jr.
Madam Clerk, please take attendance.
Chair Outman.
Here.
Representatives Alexander,
Here.
Cara,
Here.
Bruck,
Present.
Kuntz,
Here.
Nyer,
Here.
Preston,
Yep.
Bonak,
I hear you.
Frisbee,
Here.
Wertz,
Here.
Herzberg,
Here.
Hope,
Here.
Colazar,
Here.
Andrews,
Here.
Grant,
Here.
Miller,
Here.
Wilson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 16 members present. You do have a quorum.
The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee will follow Chapter 4 stated in the House Standing Rules that were adopted on the House floor. I have a proposed committee rule that I am offering. A copy is before you. Representative Coons moves to adopt the rule. Would the clerk please call the roll?
To adopt the proposed committee rule, Chair Outman.
Yes.
Representatives Alexander,
Yes.
Cara,
Yes.
Bruck,
Yay.
Kuntz,
Yes.
Nyer,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Bonak,
Yes.
Frisbee,
Yes.
Wertz,
Yes.
Herzberg,
Yes.
Hope,
Yes.
Colazar,
Yes.
Andrews,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 17 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 pass. The motion prevails.
Representative Alexander moves to adopt Tuesdays at 12 noon in room 519 of the House Office Building as the normal day, time, and location for the meetings of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Will the clerk please call the roll? Yes.
Representatives Alexander,
Yes.
Cara,
Yes.
Bruck,
Yay.
Kuntz,
Yes.
Nyer,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Bonak,
Yes.
sorry, I'm sorry, Frisbee,
Yes.
Wertz,
Yes.
Herzberg,
Yes.
Hope,
Yes.
Colazar,
Yes.
Andrews,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 17 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 pass. The motion prevails.
Well, now that we have that housekeeping out of the way, next on the agenda is a budget presentation from Bill Hamilton from the House Fiscal Agency. Bill, go ahead and proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is William Hamilton. I'm a senior fiscal analyst for the Michigan House Fiscal Agency. As most of you know, we're a nonpartisan agency of the Michigan House of Representatives, and most of our work is focused on the budget. When the governor presents a budget, we analyze the budget, break down the budget, identify what's new and different in the budget. And just last week, we published the review and analysis of the governor's proposed 2026 budget, and you'll find that on the HFA website. So most of our work is for the Appropriations Committee and the Appropriations Subcommittee. Most of the work we do for this committee is legislative analysis. So when this committee takes up bills, we will prepare a legislative analysis that describes the bill, background information on the bill, legislative history, and a fiscal impact statement that describes whether the bill has an impact on state or local costs or state or local revenue. So again, most of the work is for appropriations. The other service we provide to this committee, every 2 years I show up and give a presentation on transportation funding. So there's that. So my presentation on transportation funding, I'm going to walk through this budget briefing document. This is available on the House Fiscal Agency website. some of the slides are too detailed for a good presentation, but you have hard copies, and if members are, or if people are watching on House TV, you can go to the HFA website and find this briefing and follow along that way. We're going to start with the description of the current year state transportation budget. The budget year that began, or fiscal year that began October 1st, 2024, which will end September 30th, 2025. We're going to talk about the revenue sources that support that budget, the programs supported by the budget, and then we are going to step back and talk about transportation funding generally. And that requires us to think a bit about the difference between the budget and funding. So in this context, when I talk about funding, I'm talking about actual revenue, revenue collected and distributed, or to be direct about it, actual money. So if you are the managing director of a road commission or a Department of Public Works or a transit agency or the director of the Michigan Department of Transportation, you are most interested in you're interested in the budget, but you are most interested in actual money that your agency will receive or has received. So that's, so again, let's think about how the budget is different from funding in that context. A couple of other differences. The budget is based on revenue estimates. So they're estimates for a fiscal year that begins 8 months into the future and which doesn't end for another 20 months into the future. The budget is a single fiscal year period. So we're most interested, if we want to understand about transportation funding, we want to talk about actual revenue over an extended period of time. And in this case, we'll look back in some cases 20, 30 years. So that's a bit by way of introduction. Off we go. So this first slide is basically what I just talked about. We're going to talk about revenue sources in the budget at the budget level, programs or appropriations at the budget level, and then step back and talk about transportation funding generally. So this slide is a big high-level description of the programs funded in the state transportation budget. Oh, I know one other quick thing I forgot to mention. The budget's a good place to start because most state and local transportation funding is authorized through this budget. However, there are some other revenue sources that don't flow through the budget, and I described those in the very last slide, kind of a postscript, so don't jump ahead, we'll get there. So this slide describes what this budget supports, the major programs. The biggest program area, state and local road and bridge programs. And that includes construction and preservation of the state trunk line system. So I think most of you have some understanding of the trunk line system. That's the road network that's effectively owned by the Michigan Department of Transportation, by the state jurisdiction. That includes all the interstate highways you're familiar with, I-75, I-94, I-96, all the US numbered highways like US 2, US 23, and the M-numbered highways like M46, M1, Woodward, downtown Detroit. So the budget supports construction and preservation of the state trunk line system, and it provides the major source of funding for local road agencies. When I talk about local road agencies, you are familiar with 83 county road commissions and 531 cities and villages. The budget also supports capital and operating assistance to 80 public transit systems in the state. We talk about public transit, primarily transit systems in urban areas, DDOT and SMART in Metro Detroit, CATA in Lansing, the Rapid in Grand Rapids, plus a number of smaller countywide systems across the state. Provides capital and operating assistance for rail passenger service in Michigan, and it provides capital assistance to publicly owned public use airports. I think there are 95 eligible airports in Michigan. And finally, it provides for the administration of the Michigan Department of Transportation, which is the state department that administers these programs and at some level carries out some of these programs. So that, again, that's a big high-level view of the programs. This is a bunch of budget terms. We'll skip that, a little introductory slide. This slide duplicates the summary page of the current year state transportation budget bill. If you look at last session, look up Senate Bill 747, that's the omnibus budget. So transportation appropriations are part of that omnibus budget bill. This is a House Fiscal Agency format for describing the total revenue sources in that budget. When we talk about budgets, typically the number we talk about most is gross appropriations. In this case, the gross appropriation figure is $6,807,900,300. And let's just round that to 6.8 billion. I'll skip some of the other detail in this, but I'd like to highlight three of the major revenue sources. The biggest revenue source supporting this budget, state restricted revenue. So state restricted revenue, it's restricted either in the Constitution or by statute or some legal authority for a particular purpose. So in this case, it's restricted for transportation. The next largest revenue source, federal revenue, it's almost 2.3 billion in this budget this year. And then finally, general fund, general purpose revenue, GFGP revenue. In the current year, 193 million of general fund is appropriated in this budget. A couple of quick things before we move from the slide. First, I'll take a drink of water. Most of us don't deal in really big numbers, billions. So I try to provide a couple things in context. This is kind of elementary, but we don't think about it. A billion is 1,000 million, just a point of reference. This is roughly 8% of the total state budget. The total state economy in 2024 was about 700 billion. So they're not entirely comparable figures, but it puts things in context, about 700 billion state economy. So I think on that, I'll move to the next slide. Oh, I didn't realize this had animations, but there we go. So, so this slide is a representation, a pie chart representation of that table. And this is a better way to show that. It kind of jumps out at you better. The big blue area, state restricted revenue. And again, I'm jumping ahead a little. Restricted revenue in this budget, it comes primarily from motor fuel taxes, vehicle registration taxes, an earmark of the income tax, and some marijuana excise tax. Restricted for transportation. Again, 4.2 billion. The federal revenue, 33%. State general fund, and some miscellaneous revenue items. So a couple things if you're going to be tested on this later, like in middle school, remember it's 6.8 billion gross appropriation, and the two big revenue sources, state restricted, and over time, just a good way to think about it, about 2/3 state restricted, 1/3 federal. Again, that's pretty consistent over time. This is a picture. MDOT represents about 8% of the total budget. I'm going to skip over some of these quickly. It's a small percent of the state general fund budget, about 1% this year of the general fund budget. And this is a bar chart. We're going back 20 years showing appropriations. So we start in 2006, and you can see that the budget was fairly flat from 2006 to 2016, and then you begin to see a ramp up. I'll point out a couple things in this chart. In 2009, you see a spike in federal revenue. That was during the national economic crisis when the federal government provided additional funding to states for transportation programs. It's kind of an economic stimulus package. So you see the bump in 2009. You see the increase in the blue state restricted. That is when the November 2015 road funding package was implemented. So you see an incremental increase in state restricted and an increase in federal revenue from the federal authorization program we know as, we talk about as IJA, if you've heard the term IJA. So that's that bar chart. And I'm gonna go, did I miss one? Oh, I think I jumped ahead. Oh, here we go. Oh. So here's, I think I missed one slide that showed it in a different format. We're gonna jump to, from revenue sources to, I'm gonna, do you want me to like wrap up with this? Well, I mean, I'll keep going for a bit. So we talked about revenue sources. Here's a pie chart showing the major programs as a pie chart. Again, road and bridge programs are the biggest part of this budget, 83%, about 5.7 billion. Public transportation, about 12% of the budget, 805.6 million. And aeronautics programs, about 330 million. Again, we're still just talking about the budget. This next slide shows detail. It's a little too detailed for a presentation like this. I just want to highlight a couple of the big pie slices. The biggest part of the budget is either distributed or made available to local road agencies. Again, county road commissions, cities and villages. The next biggest slice, the state trunk line capital construction program. And when I talk about the capital program, I don't mean here like the state capital. I mean it in the accounting sense, where a capital asset, you've created a capital asset or made expenditures that extend the life of the capital asset. That is pretty much the Orange Barrel program that you see in the summer, the construction program that is carried out by private construction contractors under contract with MDOT. So those are the three biggest slices of this pie. I'm going to jump back to transportation revenue. At the beginning, I said that there were the big slice of the revenue pie, state restricted revenue. This is a breakdown of state restricted revenue. The big blue part of the pie at the bottom comes from vehicle registration taxes. We tend to focus on motor fuel taxes and the gas tax, and a lot of debate about the gas tax. Vehicle registrations are actually the biggest contributor to state restricted transportation revenue. In this case, 38% of the pie, 1.6 billion. The next slice up ahead is the motor fuel tax on gasoline. That's about 1.3 billion. And then the next little slice, the black slice, the motor fuel tax on diesel. So if you combine the two motor fuel taxes, the motor fuel tax on diesel, motor fuel tax on gasoline, it's about 1.6 billion. That's roughly the same as the vehicle registration tax. So the two are quite close in contribution. The next, and historically we could probably just quit talking at those two revenue sources, but since 2017, part of the November 2015 road funding package, we have earmarked part of income tax revenue to this budget. So in the current year, it's 600 million from the income tax earmarked for transportation. And also, I think since 2021-22, there is an earmark of the marijuana, the excise tax on recreational marijuana. And the estimate for 2025, 113.6 million. So if we talk about these five sources here in this pie chart, vehicle registrations, motor fuel tax on gasoline, motor fuel tax on diesel, the income tax earmark and the marijuana tax earmark, all those are credited to and distributed from the Michigan Transportation Fund, the MTF. So you will hear or are probably familiar with that acronym, the MTF. So this slide, it's a narrative of a text of what I just talked about. One thing to mention about the motor fuel tax. So one of the things that the November 2015 road funding plan did was include an inflation adjustment to the motor fuel taxes. So they've been increased 4 times since January 2022. They were last increased, it increased a penny back in January of this year. The current motor fuel tax on both gasoline and diesel motor fuel, 31 cents a gallon. So again, a lot of text here, which you can read at your leisure. But of the 42 billion in state restricted funds, 3.9 billion is credited to and distributed from the Michigan Transportation Fund. And that is governed by a statute, Public Act 51 of 1951. So Act 51 creates the Michigan Transportation Fund and guides or dictates the distribution of revenue from that fund. I realize that you won't take this back to session, but I'll deliver this to your offices. There's a flow chart that shows that distribution, and we just updated a publication about this on the HFA website. So one thing to keep in mind about the MTF and state restricted funds, they generally follow a distribution model. Appropriators don't make an annual affirmative decision about how to spend these funds. It's driven by a statutory formula. I'm going to jump ahead to slide 22. So again, about a third of this budget is from federal sources. And again, there's too much text to kind of wade through, but a couple of concepts I want to keep in mind. It's about $2.3 billion, 33% of the total state budget. These federal programs, so as I said, state restricted funds are distributed. The best way to think about federal aid is that it's made available to states for particular programs and projects. So one way to think about the MTF is that if you're a road commission, every month you get a distribution from the MTF. If you're a city, every month you get a distribution from the MTF. Federal funds don't have that character. They're made available for qualified projects and programs. The current authorizing statute, as I mentioned, is called IJA. That expires September 30th, 2026. So it will have to be reauthorized or these programs will go away. Again, a lot of text about federal revenue. The federal government, there's funds provided for state and local road and bridge programs, capital assistance for public transportation, and capital assistance to airports. And then I think this is the last revenue slide, general fund, general purpose revenue. So this budget used to be a totally user fee supported budget. So all the revenue came from motor fuel taxes and vehicle registration taxes, constitutionally dedicated to transportation. So beginning in 2012, general fund was appropriated for this budget. Since 2012 through the current fiscal year, Michigan transportation budgets have included a total of $2.9 billion from general tax sources, effectively general fund, general purpose revenue. And the current budget includes $193 million of general fund. $76 million was appropriated to ensure that the state of Michigan was able to capture all available federal aid with matching funds. So I'll just do one other quick thing about general fund. So we've turned away to some extent from this as a user fee driven budget. And the same thing has happened at the federal level. The Highway Trust Fund is no longer supported entirely by federal transportation taxes or road taxes. A significant amount of federal general fund is now included in federal transportation appropriations. Quick drink. So now I'm jumping back to the program level. Again, road and bridge programs, about 83% of this budget is for road and bridge programs, $3 billion for state trunk line programs, about $2.7 million to local road agencies. And why do we make this distribution? Again, much of this is dictated by statute, by Public Act 51 of 1951. Well, why do we make this distribution? Because in Michigan, the road jurisdiction is fragmented between state trunk lines, county road commissions, and cities and villages. So this table shows state trunk lines represent about almost 9,700 in road miles, map miles. In terms of map miles, that's only about 8% of total state mileage. However, state trunk lines represent about 52% of vehicle miles traveled, which is one measure of highway usage or road usage. The next slide, state bridges by jurisdiction, tells a similar story. There are about 4,500 structures on the state trunk line system. That's about 40% of total structures in the state. However, trunk line bridges represent about 73% of deck area. So you go out and measure the deck of bridges. Trunk lines, about 49, I think that's million square feet of deck area, and about 84% of average daily traffic. And one example, a great example I use, I'm not going to fumble in my notes, but a great example, the I-75 bridge over the Rouge River in Detroit. It's 8 lanes of pavement. It's the biggest bridge in the state of Michigan, 1 million square feet, just this one bridge, and an average daily traffic over, I think, 100,000 vehicles a day. So again, this is a breakdown between the 3 major systems: trunk lines, county roads, cities, and villages. This slide describes in some detail public transportation programs. Again, there are approximately 80 local public transit agencies. The budget also provides operating and capital assistance for rail passenger service and some other smaller targeted programs. And this is funded primarily from a state-restricted fund, the Comprehensive Transportation Fund. And this is also guided primarily by statute, Public Act 51 of 1951. One thing to note about this, as I mentioned before, the state of Michigan, the Michigan Department of Transportation, owns a big part of the road network. They own the state trunk line system. The Michigan Department of Transportation does not own any transit agencies. These are all locally generated, locally administered. And then the last big program area, aeronautics. This is almost entirely a program of assistance to, I believe it's 95 eligible publicly owned public use airports. So it provides funding primarily from federal funds for terminal improvements, other capital improvements, runway improvements. So that's that. Again, a lot of narrative in the text here. So here's the summation of all these different, like the 3 different programs by what I would characterize as state programs and local programs. So over half of this budget is either distributed or made available to local units of government, local road agencies, public transportation agencies, or publicly owned airports. So now, after all that, I told you I was going to go from budget to actual. So we're going to begin to talk about actual revenue collected and distributed from the Michigan Transportation Fund, the MTF. That is the main collection and distribution fund. It's also the fund that's established in state law that legislators can have some impact on. You can't really change federal law, but you can amend Act 51, and you can change the revenue sources that hit Act 51 or hit the MTF. I've got a bunch of text. I'm going to just jump to the slide 35. Here we go. So I take this chart back to 1997, before the November 2015 road funding package. 1997 was the last year the legislature affirmatively increased dedicated transportation taxes. They increased the motor fuel tax on gasoline by 4 cents and changed vehicle registration taxes. So if you look at 1997, the MTF revenue was just about $1.9 billion. Then you look, it's totally flat for close to 20 years. You look at the figure in 2016, it's a little over $2 billion. So over that almost 20-year period, totally flat MTF revenue. So again, that affects your program if you are the manager of a road commission, City Department of Public Works, the director of the Michigan Department of Transportation. You see the line begin to jump up in 2017. That is the beginning of the implementation of the November 2015 road funding package. It was passed in November 2015, but it wasn't really implemented until January 2017. So that's when you begin to see the increase. Here we go. The next slide breaks it down by the revenue source. The little dotted blue line on top, vehicle registrations, which you now see is the biggest contributor to MTF revenue. The next solid line, the motor fuel tax on gasoline. The little dotted green line on the bottom, the motor fuel tax on diesel. And then beginning in looks like 2019, that spike, the orange spike, that represents the earmark of the income tax revenue, and then the marijuana, the excise tax on recreational marijuana is that additional revenue source. This is the same information on a bar chart. I like to show all the different chart forms in the presentation. And again, the bottom is, we've got registration, diesel tax, and the gasoline tax, or the motor fuel tax. Anyway, so we are now going to jump to performance measures. So here's the question that presents itself to members to the legislature. What's a good way to evaluate public spending on transportation programs? What performance measures do we have? I use this one. This is one developed by the Michigan Department of Transportation. Back in 1997, about the same time fuel taxes were increased in 1997, the State Transportation Commission established a performance measure for the state trunkline highway system. The shorthand description is at 90% good condition by 2007. Here is a chart in which they show they hit that performance measure for the state trunkline system, I believe in 2007. They sustained it a couple years, then it's fallen below that 90% good mark. So this chart, and so this is not my chart. I've taken information from MDOT, and this is a representation of their measure. So this is based on their actual measures, actual history. The next line, next chart is their projection of pavement condition in the future at current levels of funding. And you can see the little green line shows a decline in pavement performance. And then this is a complicated chart, but the sum of it is that the Michigan Department of Transportation indicates that they need an additional investment for the state trunkline system of $2.5 billion a year, plus additional funding for the state trunkline bridges to achieve and sustain that 90% performance goal. Then finally, this slide, again, too detailed for PowerPoint. This is a description of the November 2015 road funding package. This is my postscript that talks about the other revenue sources. And this is how you can get a hold of me, House Fiscal Agency. We have a number of other publications on the agency website about the distribution from the MTF, about federal transportation sources, about how we collect motor fuel taxes. And so on that note, I think it was a quick run through with time for questions.
Excellent. Thank you for your presentation. Looks like we have a question from Representative Brock.
I get the first question. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I appreciate you being here, sir. You got a great first name, so I appreciate that. I got a couple questions. One I think is simple. Are we a donor state or a receiver state when you talk about federal dollars for the roads?
That was a controversy back, it's been a while. It was a big controversy in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's become less so because so much federal general fund is now used at the federal level. So if all you did was collect these federal user fees, you could do an analysis and say, the state of Michigan pays so much in federal fuel taxes, goes to the Highway Trust Fund. We only get 90% back from the Highway Trust Fund. Now that analysis is so skewed by the fact that so much of the federal program is now supported by federal general fund dollars. So that's a long answer, but the short answer, Not really. We're not really a donor state in the way you're thinking about.
Roger. Second thing would be when you're talking about bridges, the railroad bridges and underpasses or that grade separation. The funding for that is a little different than what would be your normal state road bridges, correct?
Well, if you have a crossing at grade, a grade crossing of a public road over across a railroad, and there's sufficient traffic, sufficient safety issues that you think you should have a grade separation, those projects are very expensive, like very expensive. So here's the problem. If you have such a facility on a local road, like a city, it's prohibitively expensive for that local unit to do that project. I think the railroad contributes some, but they're not necessarily obligated to. It's primarily for the safety and benefit of that local unit. So we have, in the last few budgets, appropriated targeted money for some of these rail grade separation projects, but we don't really have an ongoing established program to make that kind of thing happen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And then my last sign, you probably don't have an answer to this, or well, you may, but you drive down the highway. We know we get a lot of federal dollars for the highway systems, and I see it as a waste. Maybe others don't, but why do we have to have which act paid for this road? On a federal level, to me that seems like multiply that by 100 signs. That's thousands upon thousands of dollars of waste. What is that a requirement that you guys do that? Post those signs if it's, off the top of my head, I can't even think of that.
Nobody does anything because I say
infrastructure,
so.
whatever act paid for this.
So the federal government has provided funding to states for road programs, highway programs, since at least the 1920s. The current federal program was primarily developed in 1954 with the interstate highway system. So the federal government constructed this, or paid states to construct this interstate highway system. So it was a state-federal partnership. So in theory, the federal government tries to establish national goals for a transportation system. That's the idea, that we've got some, that not every state is operating independently with their own goals. There are some national goals.
It was more just a.
No, I get it. Okay.
every president seems to come out with their own sign. So thank you so much for your
You're welcome.
congeniality.
And if you don't mind, before another question, something came to. So I mentioned that I used that MDOT pavement performance chart that shows the condition of pavement. One thing I do try to mention, that is just one performance measure, one slice of one element of the state transportation system. I use that model because MDOT is the largest unified road agency in the state of Michigan. It controls the biggest chunk of the road system. They've been doing this since 1997, so we've got a long history of that pavement decay chart or pavement performance chart. So again, only one element of the system. We don't talk about, so we were just talking about pavement. We're not talking about economic development issues, safety issues. There are additional costs to safety improvements, mobility, all the other elements that go into a transportation system. We tend to focus just on the pavement part, but I'll leave it at that.
Other questions? Representative Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hamilton, I appreciate your depth of knowledge on this. Thank you very much. Slide 27, you have it listed as vehicle miles traveled.
Yes.
Can you get me that information on lane miles? Can you get me those percentages by lane miles?
So that kind of information I get from MDOT. I'll ask MDOT, and they can pull it up.
All right, very good. And then second question, if I may, Mr. Chair. When do the state bonds that are currently issued, when is that cliff? When do those expire?
Well, as I mentioned, I have publications on the agency website. I did one on bonding last year. I try to update it every time the department sells it like a new issue, so it's up to date. So It's not like a home mortgage or a car payment where there's a steady state payment. Some of the payments are staggered over time. It's the way public finance bonds are done. So let me just take a quick look. Wait, I think the entire series is scheduled to, wait,
And if it's better, I can talk with you offline.
oh, here we go. All the bonds would be paid off entirely by 2047. But again, the payments are staggered.
Yeah, not paid off, issued. When will they
Oh,
all be issued? When will the funding all be
I'm sorry,
applied?
I misunderstood.
No, I didn't ask it clearly.
No, so MDOT is the State Transportation Commission can authorize the Michigan Department of Transportation to sell bonds. They have been authorized through December of this year. And I think they still have authority about $700 million. And we talk about this $3.5 billion figure. They've sold, I think, $2.8 billion. So they have authority, I believe, to sell an additional $700 million.
Got it. And that 2.8 has already been applied to projects.
Correct.
Got it. So another year-ish?
So they've got
Right.
like 9-10 months in which
Okay.
they can sell the additional $700 million.
Again, thank you for your expertise on this.
Representative Preston.
Thank you. My question just revolves around motor fuel tax, both on the gasoline and the diesel side. I know it's adjusted for inflation. What's been the trajectory both and the projections going forward in the near-term history? I've read some areas where we've fallen short by about 50 million since 2019 on motor fuel tax revenue. Even with the inflation adjustments, where do you see motor fuel tax revenues coming in with the increased mileage standards and the onset of EVs and alternative vehicles that are, I think, really chewing into the revenue source on the motor fuel tax? And what do you see as projected income? I'm seeing projections of upwards of 95 million in shortfall by 2030. So,
Well,
thoughts?
I should start by saying I am not the HFE economist, so I don't do revenue projections. I will say that, of course, the motor fuel tax is a consumption tax. It's a tax levied on a per gallon basis. So as we consume less, baseline revenue will decline. Motor fuel consumption in Michigan peaked in 2002. So it's had a slow but steady decline. However, there are two elements to the tax. There's the base, the per gallon base, which is declining, but the tax rate has increased since 2017 from 19 cents a gallon to 31 cents a gallon. So you got the two offsetting components. The base is slowly declining, but the tax has increased. I'll leave that point there. What was the other thing I was going to say? I can't remember. Does that help a little bit?
Just
so I
kind of,
can't-
if you
well,
have
I
a
know,
crystal ball, where do you see the
I know
revenues
one
going?
quick thing. Again, I can't really do projections. I'm not the economist. But one thing to keep in mind, there are 12 million vehicle registrations each year. The Michigan Secretary of State registers 12 million vehicles. Currently, only 100,000 are electric or hybrid. So yes, on a long-term picture, undoubtedly consumption is going to continue to decline. But currently, it's a very small slice of the registration population.
Next, we'll go to Representative Frisbee.
Couple of questions. You said $2.3 million. Has MDOT estimated the cost of inaction as a result of PASER ratings? And they don't go up equally when the PASER rating goes down, they go up exponentially. So,
Well, so I would have to defer to the Michigan Department of Transportation. So again, I'm looking at it from the high-level fiscal perspective. About that kind of analysis, I would defer to MDOT.
okay. And then the bond payment sources.
So
We've issued in the last few years, the Snyder administration and the Whitmer administration. What are the sources of payments for those?
So the biggest So the bonds are generally typically sold for the state trunk line program, the state trunk line construction program. And so the fund source is the state trunk line fund. So that's the fund that supports the state trunk line system. So again, MDOT has authority to sell bonds. They sell bonds to preserve their trunk line system, and the revenue source is the state trunk line fund.
Okay. So that payment on a yearly basis for the 3.5, and we've only actually let out 2 point whatever,
Yeah,
comes out of the state trunk line.
correct.
How much is that payment a year?
Well, I've got a paper about that. So in 2024, the debt service on state trunk line bonds, about $257.6 million. So 2023, outstanding debt on the state trunk line bond program, outstanding debt about $3.3 billion. And 2024, or 2023, debt service is about $221.6 million. Estimate for 2024 was $257.6. So that's roughly the state trunk line bond payment.
And what
debt
was the
service.
yearly state trunk line budget? 600 million? Sound about right?
It's in my slide. Why haven't I got that memorized?
So we have 5 years worth of payments to catch up. Or, right? 5 years worth of our overall budget
It's for,
is, yeah.
well, yeah, about
think you know what I'm
200.
getting at.
What did I say? About 250 million.
So why would we, and you don't, this is a policy decision, but
So part of the thing too, when we look, we focus on the budget. The budget doesn't necessarily represent the total program. So the state trunk line construction program, what did I say? We make the appropriation, but the bond proceeds have been used to advance that program. So in the last 5 years, MDOT's capital construction program, where they're awarding bids to these private construction contracts to do capital construction on the system, it's roughly $2 billion per year in state trunk line construction.
yeah. Do we know the cost per mile
I don't.
on those? Okay, thanks. Thank you, sir.
All right, with that, I think we have no further questions. Bill, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
We will
I've
move
spread out
on
here. You'll
to.
apologize for while I gather all my stuff.
Perfect. Take your time, sir. Next up, we're going to be hearing testimony on House Bill 4046. Rep. Roth, do you want to make your way to the table? Thank you, Bill. Rep. Roth, whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Outman, members of the Transportation Committee. I appreciate your time here today. State Trooper Bert Johnson went to D.C. with his son and visited the National Law Enforcement Memorial and traced Trooper Boland's name. He made a promise to himself that he would remember Trooper Boland. That's when he called me. Trooper Boland was born on January 11, 1945. He graduated from Corunna High School, went on to work for the Owasso Police Department. He later became a state trooper and asked to be transferred to Owasso to be close to family. He was one of 250 troopers assigned to help with the National Governors Association that was being held at the Grand Traverse Resort. On July 26, 1987, he was directing traffic in downtown Traverse City at the fireworks in West Bay. Just before midnight, he was struck and killed by a woman who later was convicted of manslaughter, drunk driving. She fled the scene, but was apprehended a short time later. Personal for me. I got to stay calm here and remember this, but my wife had just taken a job in Traverse City in June of 1987. And we were excited. We moved to Traverse City, excitement of fireworks and all the cool stuff that was going on in Traverse City, a busy town. A month after this incident, we were married and actually permanently moved to Traverse City. it put a damper on the mood of the wonderful move that we were experiencing and the things that we were going to see in our new town. At the time of his death, Trooper Boland was survived by his wife, 5 children, parents, and siblings. His boss, State Trooper Director Colonel Richie Davis, said, "We lost a super good officer, a gentleman, extremely sensitive, compassionate person." Laura's daughter said, "Dad, we love you and miss you very much. I hope you're looking down on us and seeing your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and smiling. I know you're watching over all of us kids, brothers, sisters, parents, and grandchildren. That's what keeps me going, knowing you're still keeping us all safe. Love you, Dad." Micah's son said, "It's been 38 sad years for all of us. My greatest hero was my father, the man that taught me right from wrong and how to respect other people. Jessica's granddaughter, saddest of all. It's been said that the night you died, I woke up screaming until the phone call came. Then I went silent. I wish every day I could remember you sneaking into my room, giving me candy late at night. I wish the only memory of you I had was not your hands, but your face. Rest in peace, Grandpa. A lot of people on the memory page have said, you will always be remembered. Now we have a chance to make you remembered by being part of US 31 in East Bay Township in Grand Traverse County. We're going to name it Trooper Boland, James E. Boland Memorial Highway. I appreciate the time. I'm asking for your support, and thank you all.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you for doing that again. That's a terrible, terrible tragedy. Do we have any questions from members? No. Well, I'm going to read on a quick card here. Sergeant Travis Fletcher from the Michigan State Police. Not wishing to speak on the bill, but is supportive. Neutral on the bill is MDOT. I believe that's it, right? Thank you, Representative. We will now hear testimony on House Bill 4003. Oh, I'm sorry, we jumped the gun a little bit. We're going to actually vote that out real quick. Representative Coons makes a motion to report out House Bill 4046. Will the clerk please call the roll? Sorry, ma'am.
Chair Outman.
Yes.
Representatives Alexander,
Yes.
Kara,
Yes.
Bruck,
Yay.
Kuntz,
Yes.
Nair,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Bonak,
Yes.
Frisbee,
Yes.
Wertz,
Yes.
Hersberg,
Yes.
Hope,
Yes.
Colazar,
Yes.
Andrews,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 17 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 passed. The bill is reported with recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We will now hear testimony on House Bill 4003. Representative Kuntz, whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I had sent the video. We had this testimony last year. And if you look, Matthew Weber was injured in November of 2005 and passed away from his injuries in 2006. It was an IED in Iraq, and it took his parents that long to be comfortable coming here. And if you had a chance to watch that video, I hope you did. It was a very powerful thing. So I did not ask them to return, and I appreciate your patience. I hope you understand why I didn't ask them to return on that. So this section of US 131 is the portion that covers the Muskegon River Bridge. And Matthew grew up on the Muskegon River, so his parents thought that this would be appropriate to name the bridge after him. So he spent, again, November to April fighting his injuries. They called him Miracle Matt, but in the end, the burns on his body were too much, and he succumbed to his injuries. So I welcome any questions. Is there anything I can answer from the committee?
Do we have any questions from the committee? Even you, Brock? Nothing?
I asked last time.
I am going to answer Representative Bruck's question. He always likes to ask, one of the things that, forgive me,
Is it paid for?
thank you, Representative. We met with a family in our office, and they said we'd like to do this. And I don't know how to bring it up gracefully, but we always say, well, there's a cost. This isn't free. And I have to give her accolades. My office staff, Olivia, steps up and says, we'll take care of it. So the people leave, and I said, Olivia, it's several $1,000s. Okay, we said it, we'll do it. So Olivia helped with a GoFundMe, and they had to shut it down in 48 hours. Forgive me, they raised $7,500? $6,000, and then the extra money they donated to the local AMVETs. So, yes, the money is paid for. It came out of Big Rapids when it was there. Literally, it was 48 hours to raise the money, and then they asked that they shut it down. So I am trying to get some kudos. She stepped up to do that, and the family didn't know. I mean, this is a terrible thing. Here's this guy crying in my office, and by the way, can you write me a check for your son's sign? So I hope we can come up with a better policy on that. But yes, it is fully paid for. Olivia took care of that a year and a half ago.
Don't think there's any other questions. Thank you so much, Representative. Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to read in a couple of quick cards. Not wishing to speak, but is supportive of the bill, Heather Firestein from the Department of Military and Veteran Affairs. And then neutral on the bill and not wishing to speak is MDOT. I will now take a motion to report out House Bill 4003 with recommendation. Representative Alexander makes that motion. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Outman.
Yes.
Representatives Alexander,
Yes.
Kara,
Yes.
Bruck,
Yay.
Kuntz,
Yes?
Nyer,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Bonet,
Yes.
Frisbee,
Yes.
Wartz,
Yes.
Hersberg,
Yes.
Hope,
Yes.
Colazar,
Yes.
Andrews,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 17 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 pass. House Bill 4003 is reported with recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. There being no excused members and there being no further business before the committee stands adjourned.